Hello, I am Adam Hirschfelder, Director of the Commonwealth Club's Marin Conversation Series and a programs producer for the club. Welcome to today's important program, Populism's Toxic Embrace of Nationalism, with authors Lawrence Rosenthal and Arlie Hochschild. They'll be discussing Rosenthal's new book, Empire of Resentment, Populism's Toxic Embrace of Nationalism. The book builds on Rosenthal's work at Berkeley's Center for Right-Wing Studies. Hochschild is the award-winning author of Strangers in Their Own Land, Anger and Mourning on the American Right. Before we get to the program, a couple of quick notes. The Commonwealth Club continues to be an all-virtual organization, bringing you nearly 200 programs since March. Most of our programs are free, so we encourage you to contribute to the club. To learn more, please visit us at www.commonwealthclub.org or text donate to 415-329-4231 during this live program. Before I turn the program over to Arlie Hochschild, a note if you have a question. Please post your questions on either the YouTube chat box or in the Facebook video comment section. Questions will be forwarded to the moderator throughout the program. Now, please join me in welcoming Lawrence Rosenthal and Arlie Hochschild to the Commonwealth Club.
Well, this is Arlie by phone, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be having a conversation with Larry about a fantastic new book, Empire of Resentment, Populism's Toxic Embrace of Nationalism. I think it couldn't be more timely. So I guess I'd love to start out with asking you, Larry, how it is you happen to get interested in the topic of your book.
Well, it's a great question. It's autobiographical, I suppose. I think my work has been generally, if it has one perspective, one goal, it's to make understandable to people outside the world of conservatism and of right-wing organizations, to make what they say among themselves comprehensible. You know,
Right.
It's often kind of mysterious to people. A few years ago, I taught a course in Berkeley. It was mostly to older people, and it was on the Tea Party. And halfway through, in the first intermission, 6 different people came up to me, and they said, "How can they believe all this stuff?" And I said, "That's what the course is about." And that's been the thrust of my work from way back when I first started studying fascism in Italy on through to today. And it is the thrust, I think, of the work we do at the Berkeley Center for Right-Wing Studies.
Right. Wonderful. And in a way, you have a bunch of different kind of, we could call them worlds of truth that you're taking the reader into, right?
Good.
And the first one would be the Tea Party. In other words, part of your argument here is that the Tea Party was kind of swallowed up, by
Yes.
Trump, and then the Republican Party is swallowed up by Trump. But you have to first get us to understand why it makes any sense to be a member of the Tea Party. How would you, just starting there, take us into what feels like the truth for them?
Well, the Tea Party starts almost exactly 1 month after the inauguration of Barack Obama in 2009. Prior to that, the kinds of things that the Tea Party stood for existed in relatively more marginal parts of the right in America. But 2 things happened in the fall of 2009. One was the election of Barack Obama, and the second was the financial crisis, what came to be called the Great Recession. And the 2 of those things together created a kind of, to use the current cliche, perfect storm, such that right-wing populists who had been the voting base of the Republican Party, the people who voted almost entirely on the basis of the so-called social issues, those people, with the election of Obama, who, if you remember back then, it didn't turn out that way really, except for Obamacare. There was a sense that Obama was going to be, the word was transformative, and people talked about a second New Deal. And in the face of that, and in the face of the recession, what right-wing populism did was they adopted extreme free market ideology, the kind of ideology we associate with the Koch brothers.
We have three things. First, they start as social issues people, right? So that's guns, that's a right to life, those kinds of religion. Okay. And then we have Barack Obama, right? And he's black. This is new. Is the American, and so on. And then we have a financial crisis, which he did not cause. He came in as someone to rescue, right? But those two things became confused. So, so we're talking about morphing, and I'm getting this picture of politics as having as being not solid and concrete like, but kind of liquid almost.
Exactly.
It's quicksilver. It's shiftable. Is that your model of politics? How does it really work?
It's my model of populism. Populism adopts ideologies. In 2008, they adopted the ideology of the Koch brothers. Let's just call it that for shorthand.
So now we have a fourth thing: oil. Right. Okay.
Right. Which was, Republican anti-welfare state orthodoxy, but to an extreme extent, not merely stopping the spread, say, of Medicare and Social Security, but going back and wanting to wipe it out. That kind of the free market extremism or free market fundamentalism that it represented. But they held on to that ideology for a while. The premise of my book, or one of the premises of my book, is that right-wing populism in the form of the Tea Party, when faced in 2015 and 2016 with Donald Trump, they morphed ideologically. They migrated from free market fundamentalism to America First nationalism. That was
it's fascinating.
That was what won the presidency for Donald Trump. It won first the Republican nomination because it was winning over the largest electoral base of the Republican Party, and then it was the basis of his electoral victory. That migration, ideological migration.
So how does this ideological migration, this sense of liquidity, it quickly shifts, how that's mysterious. And I'll give you a moment from my own field work that illustrates your point. When I first went down in 2011 to a Center for Tea Party feeling in the South in Louisiana and around Lake Charles, it's recently been devastated. It's an oil and petrochemical center. And sat down with some members of the Tea Party. One woman was a teacher, and she said, "Oh, the debt, the national debt, it's terrible. In my fourth grade class in a public school, I have a big debt clock on the classroom wall, and it goes tick, 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 up, up, up the go the numbers. That's how the rise in the national debt. And why aren't we capping this, all these welfare programs, and stop spending more money than we have? So, and all of my initial interviews in 2011 and 12,
Exactly.
13 were your Tea Party people, and it was all debt, debt, debt. After the election, I went back and I didn't hear
Not a word. Yes.
about the national debt. How could that? There's a mystery here.
Well,
Was it not real? Did they really not care?
No, I think they really care, but it's not the heart of populist politics. Ideology, that ideology is not the heart. The heart is resentment. It's anger. It's resentment is anger expressed toward people who you perceive as above you, or in a class above you. And so there is this abiding anger, this abiding resentment toward, above all, liberal America, blue America, the Democratic Party, Hollywood, university professors, that sort of thing. And that's what remains constant. I use the phrase in the book that ideology is held, things like free market fundamentalism is held epidermically. That is to say, it's only skin deep. It doesn't have the hold. The hold is about the resentment. And so what happens, what you've described in 2011, 2012, before that in the Tea Party, the national focus was on Obamacare. And it was, the conviction of the Tea Party that Obamacare meant that their own health insurance and their own economic security was going to be taken away, because there's no other way to expand a benefit other than taking it away, as though benefits were zero-sum quantities. But thereafter, the Tea Party moved on to the quote-unquote debt crises of 2011 and 2013.
Right. And now they are 100% behind a guy who's raised the national debt to highest it's ever been, right? So we get a picture on this.
Well before the current economic crisis owing to the coronavirus, any conviction around the debt with respect to Donald Trump's presidency had simply disappeared.
Right. So on this question of how they could so quickly drop a top concern, I'm getting a picture from what you say that they have a series of issues they care about, and there's a rough priority. You could say free market policies is first, and guns are second, but they can loosely move something from the bottom up to the top of their list. Okay. Now, looking at the moment we're in, we have 10 weeks to go before an election. And the topic of empire of resentment couldn't be more important. There's a recent survey that found that 2/3 of members of both parties feared that we're entering into a civil war with the election coming up. So this is ominously relevant to us all today. And in the back of your mind as you were writing this was the possibility that we have to entertain seriously that a system known as fascism could actually be closer at hand than any of us want. And I'm wondering if you could tell us what your definition of fascism is, and what exactly the hallmarks of it are. What's the necessary or sufficient conditions? How close are we, or far away from it are we today?
Well, let's divide fascism into two categories. One is fascism as a political movement, and the other is fascism uh, as something that's already in power. Donald Trump, in his campaign in 2015 and 2016, did used to say very provocative, violent things in his um, campaign rallies, like, knock the crap out of him, and things of that nature. But what never developed was a kind of militia which attached itself to the campaign. That's the almost characteristic element of a fascist movement, is an electoral party married to an essentially a private militia.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
did not
So the
develop
first
during
would
the
be
campaign.
that did not during the campaign. So there was
During the
a
campaign.
heightened rhetoric that was divisive and could
And
call.
the rhetoric had the reason that in 2015 and 2016, people on both the left and the right were moved to begin discussing fascism was
Yeah.
partly was owing to so much of his rhetoric was about scapegoating, above all, Mexicans, and
Yes.
that was characteristic of
Mm.
fascist rhetoric.
Rhetoric. Right.
So the idea that as Trump called it, there's carnage in America. He would he The function of the scapegoat is to say it's their fault, and
Right.
that was it seems to me, the element that brought about the fear of fascism way
Yeah.
back when we were first being introduced to the Donald Trump campaign.
Right. And incidentally, you said something very important there, that there's fear on both the left and the right.
Yes.
The right is
absolutely.
talking about the
Absolutely.
disorder in Minneapolis and Portland as, a violent militia-like
Right.
entity on the left.
Well,
and
that's
that yeah. So speak to us a little about that.
Right now if we were to continue talking about the militia question, we're now talking about someone in power and essentially a state militia, and a state militia dedicated to the politics of the leader. And that's what has been developed. It was, as it were, the training ground for that has been the southern border, the border with Mexico. The police agencies that are at work, that have been at work down there, are the ones that have been summoned to Portland and to Washington, D.C. And in Washington, they appeared with no insignia and picked people up from the streets. And those groups, call them state militias, have functioned alongside of private militias. So
Okay, state and private militias, different kinds of militias.
Yes.
But a state militia, so that's not the National Guard. What do you mean by a state militia?
I mean by it, to use the example, Donald Trump has sent people whose job had been enforcing the regulations, the very harsh and cruel regulations at the border. Those people have been sent to places like Portland uh, uh, on the in a way that is indistinguishable at the moment from Donald Trump's current campaign for re-election. That
Okay.
um, the dominant narrative at the moment of the re-election campaign is that we are having fighting on the streets between good people who are keeping order, i.e., the
Right.
militias,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
the bad guys, the anarchists and Antifa and that sort of thing. And
Right.
so the use of this militia is hand in glove with the political
So
campaign.
so it's far more than rhetoric at this point. You know, a wonderful question has just come in from Adam Hirschfelder. It's what's the difference between populism and fascism? And with street brawls and vigilante actions, are we moving toward a fascism?
Well, elements of fascism are beginning to present themselves. I mean, what we've had under Donald Trump is of a piece with things that have been happening across uh, throughout Europe, for example, in places like Hungary and Poland. You could throw in other places as well, like India and Turkey and Russia. But it often goes by the name illiberalism. And illiberalism is about the executive uh, bringing unto itself more and more power and making political opposition as ineffectual as possible.
Sort of
And
hogging power from the
hogging
center. But
power.
then how is that different
Yeah.
from populism? So we've got three
Well, no,
terms
I
here.
think, yeah, I think that populism is the sentiment that it can be engaged by illiberal
It's more the
governments.
culture of it.
Yes,
Illiberalism is the
yeah,
practice. Is that right?
yeah. There are people who don't like to use the word populism to talk about the right. Populism in the USA has a history on the left, but they are very distinct because the populism of the left, the anger, the resentment, was typically projected at financial elites. What you get in the populism of the right is anger directed at cultural elites, and that's the kind of mentality and strongly felt emotions and anger that illiberal regimes are very successful at cultivating.
Okay, illiberalism, then you were saying, was sort of the centralization, the hogging of power
Right.
Okay, and so isn't that
And
the same thing as fascism?
no,
How are
no.
those two different? Just to get our
Like
terms straight.
illiberal regimes are like salami tactics that get rid of norms and traditions and conventions of democratic politics one by one by one. But there are Rubicons to cross
Mm-hmm.
to get from
Mm-hmm.
illiberalism to fascism.
Okay, I see.
And
It's a lesser version of the thing. Yeah.
well,
Okay.
it's not it's more than it's not a difference of degree. There really are differences of qualitative differences. There are leaps.
So it isn't just
So that
salami, more or less, but
no. I
something.
meant salami within the context of illiberalism itself.
Right.
The,
Okay.
the gap from illiberalism to fascism, I think, is a leap. And
Mm-hmm.
one way you can look at it is illiberal regimes still derive their legitimacy from elections. So there are still elections in Hungary. There are still elections in Russia. The classic fascist regimes um, did not believe in elections, and they derived their legitimacy from the mystical powers, almost mystical powers of the
Mm-hmm.
leader. The leader was someone who had extraordinary insight and almost providential insight into
Mm-hmm.
what the nation needs.
Right,
So
right.
legitimacy rested on the Führer or the Duce. And
Mm-hmm.
that one, that, if you want to say, a Rubicon to cross from illiberalism to fascism. That one we've seen a little bit of in this country in the last several weeks.
Mm.
If you look at the Republican National Convention,
Yes,
where what was the platform? The platform is what he says.
itself.
You know, is
Right,
is
right. Had
was
no platform.
was the leader. So
Magical.
that's an
Hmm.
element that's really significant in my view,
Yeah,
that the party, the Republican Party, has ceded its politics, its
right.
ideology, whatever it is that it stands for, to uh, the all-seeing leader, to the
Right,
person who has called himself the chosen one.
right. Now, we've often said, well, look, America is different. It's exceptional,
Yeah,
right? America,
yeah.
exceptionalism. And that we're not like Hungary, we're not like Russia, we're not like Italy. How much is that true? How many
It's
counter pressures against fascism would you say are reassuringly embedded in American culture and
well,
politics?
if you take a place like Hungary, it the democratic system emerged around 1990. It's maybe
Mm-hmm.
30 years old. The system in the USA is 250 years old or so.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the institutional structure is much more robust here. It's not
Mm-hmm.
eternal. It's not permanent. It's not something that can't be eroded. But
Yeah,
it is a much steeper climb for
yeah.
illiberalism. You would not get in Viktor Orban's Hungary. You would not
Right.
get PBS or Stephen Colbert on television.
Mm.
You know, those the institutional and civil society resistance to the illiberalism of Donald Trump's government is more robust here and will take
Right.
a great deal more battering to go away
Okay.
than in other
Yeah.
places.
Right.
Um,
Now, there's another question that's come up again from Adam Hirschfelder that's really interesting. He says that this is changing our focus a little. A recent poll showed that a majority of Republicans are okay with a high number of deaths from COVID-19. Is this a right-wing populism of a sort of Darwinian attitude, or do you think it is part of, well, we're in a war and our great leader is telling us to be brave, fitting in with
yeah.
a sort of that, or
Well,
why is there a difference between what Republicans and Democrats think about death from COVID?
Well, let me go back to the Tea Party for a second. One of the elements that was very strong in the Tea Party was their conviction that about the Constitution, and that
Yeah,
they would tell people there was no. It was a movement that would hand out the Constitution and say we have a uniquely
right,
powerful understanding of the Constitution, and part
right.
of that was that ordinary people
Mm-hmm.
could interpret the Constitution. It wasn't simply the elites like judges and lawyers who
Mm-hmm.
could talk about the Constitution. It,
Mm.
in scholars, legal scholars called that populist originalism being the judicial philosophy of the likes of Antonin Scalia, but popular originalism, that ordinary people could do it. In the emergence of the anti-lockdown demonstrations, which many people observed, and I think it was accurate, felt a great deal like the emergence of the Tea Party in 2009, that this kind of anti-elite conviction that they don't know better than we do morphed, transformed itself to the question of public health. I think that what you could say is that populist originalism morphed into populist epidemiology. And
fascinating.
And the convictions around populist epidemiology have proven remarkably stable. Now, the great outbursts of COVID disease were in the cities, and so
at first,
that is
not
relatively
now.
right.
Yeah.
And so, what's striking thus far is, now that it has moved from blue America to red America, that the convictions of populist epidemiology have still held in the face of death in red America. And it's an interesting thing. I don't
Even
know
though they're, and actually, many of the people that I came to know and wrote about in Strangers on Their Own Land have gotten COVID. And they've gone to church meetings because they didn't believe it was real. Those experts were saying, and maybe we should just take a little Clorox. I mean, no one took it that far. But, there was a disbelief. So populism has to do with kind of what you, the source of authority for what is true.
Yes. And the conviction, the many years conviction that liberal elites are in it for the money, are basically people who think they know better than we do and want to tell us how to live. That has managed to carry over to an issue which includes questions of mortality. It is, I think, a statement of how profoundly held this resentment and anger, has lodged itself in right-wing America.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, because they are now really suffering from this.
Well, as you pointed out, in your book, they were suffering. The people you interviewed and the people you got to know had generations already of environmental, of ill health, cancers, and things like that from environmental degradation at an extraordinary level at the hands of the oil and gas industry, and yet they held firm to the conviction that the liberal world is not a solution for them, is not something that they could buy into.
Why is that, do you think? Why has this happened, and why now?
Well, these are views that have been out there in marginal constituencies. They haven't been, until Donald Trump, national issues since the 1920s and 1930s, when the KKK, for example, was a powerful national force. But a couple of things happened that brought it to the level where it could develop a national footprint and, in fact, become a kind of kingmaker inside the Republican Party, as the Tea Party was, and now as the Trump movement is. And the first one of those was the economic crisis of 2008, which put the wolf at the door in terms of economic insecurity. And that was followed by the conviction that starting in around 2015, that migrants and immigrants were the cause of the of American distress. And so those two elements, first the Great Recession, and then the rise of the quote unquote immigrant crisis, or the crisis on the southern border, those two things. And interestingly, those two things very much track with the rise of illiberal regimes in Europe. You had, again, these were points of view that existed, had never come to power. But then you got the Great Recession, and then you got the European immigration crisis from the Middle East, above all, the Middle East and Africa, in about 2015. And suddenly, Trump-like parties throughout Europe became national actors. In Italy, they became part of the ruling coalition. You could argue Boris Johnson in Britain is a member of this category of political leader. So though there were these external events, and then there's the larger, structural question of both inequality and deindustrialization, that working class people, that the gap. In the 1970s, there were several theorists of fascism who argued that the best kind of seedbed or ground, the most fertile ground for the rise of fascism, were countries which had great differences in where the economic development existed. That is to say, you have things like in Italy, you had in the countryside a system of land tenure which was unchanged since the Middle Ages, with huge landowners and serfs and things like that. And in Milano and Torino, you had advanced automobile and aircraft industries. So it's as though Italy had economically was two countries at completely different levels of economic development. And something similar obtained in Germany, and in the West and in the USA, the 30-year slow roll of deindustrialization has produced coasts where people are involved in finance and information technology, and an interior where people have been displaced from the kinds of jobs that seem to justify the American dream.
So this is an echo.
So that kind of it's almost as though, instead of there being development into two different stages, it's as though here we have had one side which has developed into the post-industrial economy of finance and high tech, and the other has not only not found a place in that, the bottom has been pulled out of the economy that
Exactly.
they're in. So
That's right.
you have what these 1970s theorists called a fascistogenic
Yeah.
situation. That is to
Yeah.
say, a a uh, a, a fertile ground for
Yeah.
this kind of
Yeah.
thing to take hold.
So we've got this big division, and the top is modernizing and getting richer, and the bottom is not only um, staying put, but going backwards, and that's
Backdoor.
the fascistic gogenic. Yeah, good. Very helpful. Now, I want to ask you if you were, just because the election is coming up, 9 weeks, if you could sit down with Joe Biden right now and you've got a period of time ahead of you, what could he do? What would you like to see him do that could make a difference?
Well, strategically, um, what he's got to do, the first and most important thing he's got to do is to keep the blue coalition together and get them to the polls. Um, it, what we're faced with, I would tell Joe Biden, is we can have 2016 or we can have 2018. In 2016, Blue America kind of had this inkling that Donald Trump was not going to be was kind of unfit for the presidency, but the assumption that Hillary Clinton would win, led to some indifference about actually getting out. In 2018, on the contrary, 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency had created a feeling in Blue America that led to a blue wave. Many, many more people came out and voted.
Mhm.
2020 should be 2018 on steroids. Two more
Okay, how would he
years
do
of
that? What
and
specifically?
what he
Yeah.
needs to do is deliver a message to Blue America that you were right in 2016. You know your
18.
your indication, your gut feeling that this guy was unfit to be president has proven true. You came out in 2018 for that, and you need to come out in 2020. And
Come out
th-
why? What should be the reason that, what would be his call, you know, to get
um,
people out?
well, there's two calls, but they're both, it seems to me, um, about Donald Trump. One is that he has proven unfit on so many levels that uh, the the only way to return to uh, normalcy, to use the cliche, is by coming out in massive numbers. Um, so
Vote.
what
Well, what
Biden
about,
is offering
yeah, you're,
is
go ahead.
a return to normalcy, but it also is, in terms of policy, he is talking about, um, his version of something like the Green New Deal. So in 2018, questions of healthcare were extraordinarily important,
Well, what should
and
he say, for example, in the Republican National Convention just a few days ago? He was saying to Americans, that is, Trump was saying, oh, your vote will decide, this is a quote, whether we protect law abiding Americans or whether we give free rein to violent anarchists, agitators, and criminals. So Trump is blaming
yes,
disorder on
yes,
Joe Biden,
Right.
although
So
Trump is president and Joe Biden is not. What shouldn't he say something about that?
well,
Wait a minute. Why are you
yes.
pinning this on me?
Right. I think he might say something like, we as Americans know the real difference between um, a strong leader and somebody who simply has a big mouth. Donald Trump has not come through on almost anything he promised, and one of the reasons for that is that he has proven incompetent, and the incompetence has become tragic with the coming of the coronavirus.
So, should he say anything about himself rather than just being
I
against
think that
Trump?
what is really important for him himself is to take on something like the character of what used to be called among Democrats the happy warrior. I think he has to um, embody some hope for optimism. He has to be an optimistic beacon. He has to
Mhm.
say this is going to pass. We have a bright future. Here's how we get there. And I think he has to not ever let Donald Trump get under his skin, and he has to convey, you know, there is sunshine coming.
But okay, with many cities uh, having really ground warfare and
Yes,
looting and
yes.
fires and shootings, um, what should Joe Biden say about law and order?
What he's chosen to say is um, that protests are good, but any kind of violence is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
What he needs to do is uh, parry the suggestion from the narrative of the Trump campaign that this is provoked by the terrorists of the left. The Antifa has been designated in this country a domestic terrorist group. There is no group on the right. These are the people who show up with automatic weapons.
Mm-hmm.
There's no group on the right which has been characterized as officially as a domestic terrorist group. He needs to talk explicitly about the nature of domestic terrorism and where it's actually coming from.
Right. Good. Okay. So that in a way, he has to speak to people's desire not to have looting, not to have fires, right? And not to take blame for those things, right? He could,
That's
so
yeah.
he
To
could
to
say, we're law
acknowledge,
and order too, but
yeah,
fair laws, laws that make sense, laws that are equitably applied, and we're for order, but like a good order. Um, I mean, do you think there should be some um, claiming of that language? Because I
it's
guess
here's
behind it,
here's
I am
the
also
problem.
mindful that the way that this is a common way in which tyrants rise,
Right,
including
and
Hitler,
so
that
you
in
need,
fact Hitler was the law and order answer to left
yes,
wing disorder.
yes.
And so we need to look at that history, right?
You couldn't be more right about that. And the alt right, for example, is self conscious about that. The alt right people, the people who actually put together the demonstrations in Charlottesville in 2017, their goal was to create a unified right-wing militia in this country, and they required the 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 belief that there was something called Antifa or anarchists, and that they would fight it out on the streets,
Right.
precisely using the model of Weimar Germany, that is to say, the period before Hitler seized power. Um,
Right.
so the real issue is, how do you say this? How do you address this without accepting and
Yes.
thereby intensifying the Trump narrative of
Right.
what the
Wonderful.
2020 election campaign
Wow.
is about? How
Wonderful.
do you engage the question
Yeah.
without saying, you know, there's these two sides, and we have to choose between who's good and who's bad?
That's right.
Trump and the
That's right.
Republicans have made their choice in
Yeah.
that regard. Um,
Yeah.
but you know, you need to find a way to address the question of violence on the streets of Portland,
Absolutely. It
which
can't be
has
ignored.
a
Right.
different narrative.
Right. Good. And strengthen the right narrative. Well, look, our time is run out. And I want to thank you so much,
Oh,
Larry
thank you.
Rosenthal, chair of the Berkeley Center for Right Wing Studies and author of Empire of Resentment: Populism's Toxic Embrace of Nationalism. So, I hope our listeners will go out and pick up a copy of The Empire of Resentment at a local independent bookstore. And we also want to express our appreciation of all our viewers joining us online. I'm Arlie Hochschild, and this concludes our virtual Commonwealth Club program. Stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you.